Okay, we are continuing on chapter 6 of Java concept of big Java with loops. So we just covered do while, and now we are going to get into the processing Sentinel value. In the self-check before this, it was said that, okay, if you are receiving series of input from the user, somewhere, somehow you have to figure out how to stop it. And that's where Sentinel value is going to come to play. So, for example, if we have series of number and we know the number cannot be 0, then we're going to say, hey, if you put a 0, we're going to stop. Or we can so if we know we cannot have any negative number, we're going to say as soon as you put a negative number, we're going to stop. So the idea is that the number that we're going to say, call it as a Sentinel value, that number is not included in the data. So as soon as I see it, I know this is not the part of the data. So the book has some side notes which is interesting, and that's a reason. That's one of the reasons I like this book. That has some of the side notes that get me interested in something, and I like those distractions. The book, the pictures, the common error, and special topics. All those things are very interesting to me. That I'm reading the book, and all of a sudden something comes up, and I get more interested in it. So in computers, it says that the Sentinel guard is going to be Sentinel going to be guarding the border or a passage, and they just have to check to see if that's correct person to go through. And in computer science, we are going to put it in for the input and those things. So if I am doing the salaries, there is a possibility that somebody has a 0 salary for they were just hired or they're not working at this time, taking a break or something. So I cannot use the 0. But nobody can have negative salary. They cannot work and then they owe us money. So we can use a -1 for indicating the termination. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask the, again, my style is a little different, but that's okay. So we're going to read the input, and then we're going to process the input as far as the -1. As soon as we get -1, we're going to stop. This is the sample in your book. Again, if you bought the book, you have the access to the code, sample code in the book. You can play with it and practice on it. So this is using the while loop, the way that I was thinking instead of the do while. It's doing the salary not equal -1. So we set the salary to be not -1. In this case, it's going to be a 0. So if a 0 is not -1, we're going to be sure it's going to go inside first. We're going to be updating our salary by reading it, and we read it, and then we are going to do some calculations, and we are adding count to see how many we do. Another way of doing it is to put this salary outside of this while loop, to read it first, check it for negative number, do the calculation, and then put another read salary over here. The reason I want to do this is if I get the -1, then I have to check it to be sure it's not -1 before I do the calculation. But if I put this outside and I'm checking my -1 here, I don't have to worry about checking it inside here. I'm just going to do this, and then I read this one again right here. So there's different options, different ways of doing it. I like to bring up different options, and then you can choose the one that you like. Some of them are convention, some of them are personal choice, and just want to give you different options so you can choose which one you want to do. So we're going through some of the Sentinel values. So we can have a Boolean to control things. So we can have something like valid and not valid, or Boolean, remember, it can be true or false only. So we can set it before we go in the loop. And then if something happens, if we see something, we're going to change that Boolean value. Then your loop is going to stop. So again, this is the style that I like. We're going to do things outside the loop, and then we're going to check it inside the loop. Again, let's go over this, and then I give you my suggestion. So we're going to ask the user to enter the salaries, -1 to finish. So we're going to set the done to false, and then we are going to say if not done. So if it's not done, so not false is going to be true, it's going to go in here. Now, in this example, in your book, is using the next double at the beginning. I don't like that. I like to put that one at the end. The reason for that is I don't have to check it right here. So in my style, this next double is going to go outside the while loop. We're going to check it, and then we're going to go inside. So my processing is going to happen before I check it again. My check always going to be the last thing I want to do in my loop, but these are another option. So if I have my check over here, then I have to be sure it's not -1. Because if it's -1, I'm going to set the done equal true. It's not going to go through this processing. It's going to come back here. Opposite of true is false, and we're going to get out. Now, a couple of notes over here. I mentioned this before in another lecture video, that equal can cause some issues. Sometimes we step over it, sometimes things happen. So another thing that I get used to doing is to stay away from equal, not equal. So I would change this to something like if value is less than 0. So for any reason, for anything that happened and my value goes below 0, then I'm going to check for that. I'm not only checking for -1, I'm checking for all the negative numbers. So if the user put -2, it still is going to work. So instead of 1, if the user put -10, it's still going to work. As far as it's a negative number, it's going to work. Just a side note on that one. So when any number can be an acceptable input, so negative number is acceptable, 0 is number acceptable. So remember, the Sentinel value should be a value that doesn't exist in the range that we are asking the user to put it. So in this case, we can ask for something outside of a number. So we want to ask something like enter a number and Q to quick. So we are reading numbers, and then if they put a letter, some of you were asking this before, how do we handle if the user put a different data type? So the way that we're going to be doing it is we're going to be checking for has next double. Okay, so this has next double is going to look for a double number, or we can do has next int. It's looking for a number, and if a double is not enter, then it's just going to get out of it. If we are saying to put a Q, but technically they put anything beside the double, it's going to quit. So you can put any word in there, any other character. We are not actually checking for Q. We can, but that's not our concern. Our concern is we're receiving some numbers, and if it's not it's not the number, we're going to stop. All right, we have a loop and a half problem. So what happens is sometimes we are doing our loop, and then in the middle of it somewhere, we don't need to do the rest of it, or we don't need to evaluate the stuff. Remember, if a condition change on middle or toward the top of my loop, I'm still doing some processing at the end. So this is the style that I was talking to you about, and we can put the combination of the assignment in there. So the way that I look at it is I would look at the range of data that's acceptable. So let's say I'm looking for college student age. I'm accepting somewhere between 14 to 99. So if it's greater than 14 or less than 99, maybe this, we're talking this, maybe this is not a good example, but that's the range we are looking. I'm looking for a way, remember, the computer doesn't have unlimited stuff. So if I'm talking about college age, I have to have an upper limit and lower limit. We can adjust it to be sure we are not discriminating. Let's say you want to accept 99 and above. Okay, fine. How about 150, 120? Something that we want to check to be sure that the data is correct. So we have to have some boundaries. So when we have that boundaries, I put the correct boundaries, whatever it is, greater than 14, less than 120, and then I put a not at the beginning of it. So this is the correct one. If it's not the correct one, then we're going to go in there and ask the user to enter again. All right, so this is going to end up this section. Again, we're going through the self-checks. We're going to go over some of these things in the class, and I want you think about these things, put the video on pause, work on these things. I want you to think about it before you come to the class. So when we're discussing about it, you know what you're talking about. So what does the Sentinel demo Java program print when the user immediately types -1 when the prompt for the value? So these are the boundaries we got to check. So if we are asking the user to enter salaries, and the first thing they put is -1, then what? Then what's going to happen? Why does the Sentinel demo Java program have 2 checks for the form salary not equal -1? And that's something that I talked about it earlier. What would happen if the declaration of the salary variable in the Sentinel was changed to double salary -1? Something to think about it. Again, you need to open your book, go to this page, and look at the example that you have in the book so you can answer this one. In the last example of this section, we prompt the user enter values Q to quit. What happens when the user enters a different letter? I already talked about that, so you should have the answer for it. What is wrong with the following loop for reading a sequence of values? So we are asking the user to enter values with the Q to quit. Then we have a do while and we go through it. We are reading the next double, and we're adding it to the sum, and we're gonna do plus, and then we do the checking over here. So what's wrong with this? Put a pause on the video and answer the question. So I'm going to stop here to go to the next one.